I don't know how to start this one.
I'm just getting back to everything after the trip my wife and I went on. And I will say it's nice to have pretty much all the work from the fall trip behind me. And as the prize at the end of all of this, after all the hard work of the trip to Zion, the print portfolios, the zines, the videos, all that sort of stuff, there's this cherry on top, right? It's called jury duty. So I gotta start calling in for that next week. It's the one where you gotta call every night before, and you just have this perpetual dread of it could be tomorrow. No, it could be the next day. It could be the next day. And so that'll be just before going off to Death Valley. So yeah, good times. Of course, you got your trip to Japan coming up. Any more developments on that at all?
Not really, no. Kind of just debating. I've booked my hotel for Tokyo for my first night there, and I haven't booked anything else for it, at least in terms of hotels, not yet.
Is there going to be like a kind of like a VRBO Airbnb sort of thing, or are you going to do hotels? What are you thinking?
More traditional, like hotels. Because I'm going to spend, like I said before, the majority of my trip, I'm going to be in Nagano. But I'm just debating if I want to spend like the last weekend that I'm there, say Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday in Tokyo, round out the trip that way. Because then
the whole experience.
Then I can do like any kind of more touristy kind of Tokyo destination, explore some of the back alleys of Tokyo and get away from some things, get away from the crowds as best as I can in there. It's possible.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's kind of what's holding me from booking my Nagano hotel right now. Plus, I want to look a bit more into it, see what's available that's not going to be like super expensive in terms of like, it'd be cool to be at a hotel with private onsens, private hot spring baths, that kind of thing.
That would be very nice.
Yes, absolutely. I think that would be a wonderful way to round out an evening, just hopping in an onsen after being in the snowy wilderness for most of the day.
Yeah.
So we'll see. And then one of the other things that I was thinking about with the trip in general is that there's a decent amount of abandoned towns and cities, even abandoned like amusement parks. And I really want to check some of that.
Because of like the population changes there and such?
From my understanding, yeah. Just that these towns just kind of naturally die off as different generations decide to go more towards Tokyo or towards more of the populated areas because of better work opportunities. They don't want to take over the kisses or the coffee shops or the mom and pop shops that generations before them had taken over and had been running. Mm-hmm. So these towns just, like I said, have a very natural kind of decline. From what I've heard, and of course, most of my experience when it comes to Japan comes from Craig Mod, but from what he said about these towns and his multiple times walking through them, it's very safe just to be in them. There's not like, you would think if a town has died off and there's a lot of poverty there or something, at least in the US, typically poverty aligns with crime and drugs, but that's not necessarily the case over there. So I think it would just be cool to kind of dive into that realm of Japan, see that side of Japan. And like I said, they have quite a bit of these abandoned amusement parks that I don't know if legally I can get access to them. If you're free to roam around in them. The last thing that I want is to be arrested in Japan for trespassing or something.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a way to start my trip. So I need to do a little bit more research about that. But I think that could be a nice way to break up the monotony, perhaps, of being in a snowy wilderness and snowy woodlands.
How are you planning on getting around?
Trains.
Okay.
Yeah, from what Mark Davis has told me, yeah, they have a great system. Mark Davis told me that they have trains that take you to like backcountry trails and stuff like that.
Wow.
Not far from them.
So basically trains
buses,
and walking will get you covered for most things.
Yeah. That's what I've been told so far, because there's no way that I can drive over there. Not legally, and also I wouldn't survive because I don't know the language. I would not be able to read any of the signs, and it's a whole other world. And I don't have my international driver's license, so that also doesn't help.
Yeah, what have other people told you about in terms of getting around in a country where everything's in Japanese? Any issues with that? Any concerns with that? Any strategies for that?
Primarily just downloading the Google Translate and using the camera to have it auto-translate the Japanese into English. That's the biggest thing that I've been told. And even Mark Davis says that he uses that quite often, despite having lived in Japan for however long now. So that's going to be probably my best friend throughout the entire trip.
Yeah. I kind of wonder how, with all these tools that we have now that make things so much easier from that standpoint, it makes you wonder how people were able to get around and travel and all that, before all of those tools. Certainly seems like it would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that at least in Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, Nara, the more popular tourist destinations, I think that they have better, call it an infrastructure or a system for English-speaking tourists, in terms of having both the Japanese and the English on signs. But that's obviously not going to be for everything. Mom and pop shops aren't going to be the most accommodating when it comes to speaking or learning another language. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm not too concerned about it because of having that Google Translate, and I'll make my way around. So, yeah.
Well, that's definitely very exciting. I've been thinking ahead for my trip to Death Valley, and then also my spring trip. And a little while back, I've been trying to work on some of the things as far as what I have with me when I go on my trips. It just makes life a little bit easier. And like during the fall trip, as I mentioned in a past recording about how I got that camp shower set up. So at the end of a long day, I could have a hot shower. It was quite nice.
Yeah.
Another thing that I added, which I mention this because there might be other people out there that don't realize that this is really even possible. But a little while back, in December, I bought one of the Starlink minis. And obviously, I'm not the biggest fan of Musk, but you got to admit that Starlink is a pretty amazing service. But the Starlink mini, it's a smaller antenna than that is the previous one, so much so that I can fit it in the moonroof of my 4Runner. They have these like suction cup kits where it basically suction cups to the underside of the moonroof. I can close the slide and then I can run it off a battery pack. And even as I'm driving around, I will have like fully connected service like in the middle of nowhere. And so I tested that a little while back, and it worked. It works really, really well. And so especially in Death Valley, where there's a really horrible cell signal there. If you're in the Furnace Creek area, you really can't call. You really can't use any data network or anything. It may be like 2 a.m. or something like that. You might be able to send an email. It's like really bad. But to be able to have that form of connection, which I know a lot of people go off into the wilderness, to get away from stuff, but
yeah,
it does give that peace of mind, which is quite nice. And so I tested it out, and it works really, really well. I run it off a Bluetti battery pack, the AC70, and I could basically run it all day and it would not take the battery all the way down. And then as I drive, it charges that battery. So that's another thing I've been kind of working on in the background in order to make life a little easier on the trips. Because I think having those conveniences of home, it puts me in a better mindset in the field, and I think allows me to be a bit more productive. So I'm also looking forward to, on the spring backpacking trip, being able to camp in some areas that I otherwise wouldn't have, because I was just sticking to areas that had a cell signal. So it kind of opens up new possibilities. But If anyone listening is considering that, it does tuck up inside the moonroof of the 4Runner quite well, and I imagine a lot of cars it could do that. So pretty cool technology.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I struggle with that a little bit just because I get out in nature and I don't want to be bothered by people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm out in nature, especially, it's one of the few times that, supposing I don't have cell signal, I don't feel a need to be on my phone all the time.
Yeah.
And my biggest fear of introducing something like that, as nice as it would be from a safety aspect, would be that, well, now I have signal, so now I can be on my phone.
Yeah.
Instead of reading or writing or doing whatever I would do in the evenings in the campground. So I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that, but it's definitely, like I said, definitely a great safety feature, but otherwise it's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, and like just like the psychological advantage of, let's say I'm hiking back to my 4Runner after being on one of the backpacking trips, and the trailhead's off in the middle of nowhere, so there's no cell access or anything. But just know that I can go back, flip a switch, power it on, and then in 30 seconds or so, it's connected, and I could do like a FaceTime with my wife. There's so many, like, having that sense of connection can be a very good thing. I might listen to like some streaming audio. I might download some podcasts, stuff like that. There's other things too, which is when I'm out in the middle of nowhere, I oftentimes have these, like, I'll be thinking about something and I'll be wondering about something. And I love that aspect of having a phone with me and having a connection where I can just do a quick search for something and then, learn about something. Like the other day I was, I have a connection and stuff at home, obviously, so I can just look stuff up right away. So it's not like I'm off wondering about this topic in the middle of nowhere. But I was thinking about I was wondering how much energy it takes to produce hydrogen for like a hydrogen powered vehicle. Because I'm wondering, like, how I know it's a ton of energy that goes into it. But I was wondering about that compared to like the production of gasoline. And that's actually something where Google, the AI stuff, does a really good job at answering those questions and pulls you up the sources. I feel like it's gotten even better in the past like month or so. And so just to be able to have access to that. And the answer was, I think it was for 1 kilogram of hydrogen is about equivalent energy to a gallon of gasoline. And versus a gallon of gasoline, it takes 0.2 kilowatt hours or something like that to produce. It's like 50 kilowatt hours to produce the hydrogen. So it's like this huge difference. But I love having access to information. I don't really doom scroll on social media. I find myself spending a bit more time just browsing some stuff on Reddit than I do, like Instagram or other stuff like that. But I love having that access of information because it scratches that itch in terms of wondering about something and being curious about something. So that's one aspect I really do enjoy about being connected. But I totally see how that would also lead some people to fall into that, that doom scrolling trap. And that's obviously not a good thing.
I also wonder how that ease of access to various information has altered how we go about things in life. Just from a standpoint of, like, I like to think things through. And I think we've talked about this in a previous episode, mainly about like different actors on TV shows and movies. But there's something to be said about wondering about a topic and trying to work your way through it and trying to figure it out yourself versus quickly looking it up. And I wonder how that has changed and what the actual pros and cons of that are, like looking over a span of generations.
Well, yeah, it's a matter of, to some degree, it's a matter of, exercising those critical thinking skills, which seem to be a bit lacking. But for me, at least, having access to the information it only furthers that sense of curiosity, and I find myself learning about more and more things. But also, I think it would be very easy for a person, the information that they get will have some degree of a bias, which will only further create that bubble that people are in, which leads to this feeling that people, I think there's a feeling now that people understand how everything works. From the standpoint that they think they have it all figured out, and that there's perhaps some easy solutions, and then it's easy to point fingers and blame people and stuff like that, versus approaching a situation with not really knowing much about it and realizing that you don't really know much about it, and then using that as a way of learning about something, but without falling into those traps that exist with the bubbles that everyone finds themselves in these days.
Yeah. I also wonder how this is all going to change in the next 10, 15, 20 years, especially with like the AI summaries coming up, the accuracy of them. Because I just saw something on Reddit, a screenshot of looking at, had something to do with a Nissan car and the torque specs of something within the car. I don't remember exactly what, but the Google AI pulled up something that said that it was 25 foot-pounds, or however that's measured. And the next screenshot was a comparison of the actual owner's manual of the car itself, and it was something like 98 foot-pounds.
Yeah, so way
like drastically different, to the point where you follow Google AI's information as a quick like search without actually looking at the sources and where it's pulling this information. You could end up like severely hurting yourself or killing someone else because of not following those specs, in this example at least.
Yeah.
Which may be far and few in between, and maybe an extreme example, but nonetheless, I'm curious how they're going to work to better that, to be pulling from the correct sources rather than from the Reddit forums and the various other online forums that have more opinion than they do fact. And just overall too, how everybody says rightfully, I should say, says that there's so much misinformation online, like because there's such a vast amount of opinion online, and anybody who wants to can have a voice or a website. So I wonder how the general internet itself is going to change in the future to combat that.
Yeah, because all those summaries are only as good as the information they're feeding upon, and you kind of wonder if at some point there's just going to be a lot of sources putting completely false information out there intentionally just for the sake of the AI picking it up and somehow using that to manipulate things to, I don't know, or make money or fame or whatever it is.
They'll figure out some way to monetize it. Yeah,
exactly. And that actually leads to another topic that I've been thinking about a little bit, having to do with, just like you're saying about how, each person is in some cases seen as like an authority on something. If you put stuff out long enough, you become this sense of authority, and then people take it with weight. But there isn't necessarily anything behind that. And so I kind of find myself in a little bit of that situation. Honestly, I feel very awkward about it when you realize that if you're just going out and, taking pictures, or be other people that will buy a camera because that's the camera you're using, or they'll buy a lens because that's the lens that you're using. And there's almost like this feeling that, I don't know how to describe it, but I start feeling like responsible for like these other decisions people are making. I'm like, don't just buy this camera because I'm using it. Don't just buy this lens because I'm using it. But I think that's just the way that human nature is, for that kind of a thing. Yeah. And so I was thinking about something, which is, well, I'll put it this way. If someone was to ask you how old you are, would you know right away?
If I would know my own age, you mean?
Yeah, do you know your own age without doing math?
It takes me a second, but yeah.
So I have a hard time with that. I've always had a hard time with that. Like I literally have to take the year and then do just like a little bit of math to figure out where I am. Then I got to figure out, like, is it before or is it after my birthday? And then that gets a little confusing.
Yeah, I get the same way whenever I'm asked by like, especially the kids that I work with, if they ask how old I am,
Yeah.
it takes me a few seconds to have it actually register. Like just this week, the number of times that I have been thinking for one reason or another about my age, thinking, oh yeah, I'm 25. And then I think about it a little bit more. I'm like, oh no, I'm 26.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's weird because like I've always been off by about 3 years, even when I was a kid, which gets a little bit
3
weird.
years older or younger, or did it change?
I've always said younger. Like
Okay.
I have this specific memory of being in elementary school, and I was like hanging out by the swing set, as all the cool kids do.
Right.
And I don't know, I must have been in like the 4th grade or something like that. And there's another kid who asked how old I was, and I was off by 3 years. That's a very large margin of error if if you're in like the 4th grade. And I've come to the and I say that because now I am okay. Let's see, it's 2025 that we're recording this, so I'll be turning 44 this year, but I'm currently 43. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Sounds good. It could be off by 3 years, could be off by 10, whatever.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm probably 30. Like I feel like the 20s. Looking back on the 20s are kind of like a no man's land, which I don't know. Maybe you're feeling that. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely feeling that, especially this week.
Yeah, 20s are like late teens. It's kind of like this weird, you feel like in some ways you're like in your 30s, but you also feel like in some ways like you're in your teens. It's just, it's a weird no man's land. 30s were kind of interesting. It was kind of extension of the same. But now, here I am. I've been doing photography for a while. I'm in my early mid 40s because I don't want to do math again right now. I feel like I'm like 30 or so. But at the same time, when I've been putting stuff out there for a while, it starts to, you almost like take on this role of like a mentor about things, which I gotta say, it feels like it shouldn't be the case because I'm just fumbling my way through stuff. Like I'm just taking pictures of rocks and trees and going around and doing all this sort of stuff. But I think if you do a particular thing for a long enough time, people look at that and then you end up with this a little bit of a different role. But I'm just here to say that I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm just taking pictures of rocks and dirt and mud and stuff. And so it is a bit of a strange notion to me about how people will look at that and they might want to buy the same whatever because that's what I'm using or this or that. And then along the same lines, I don't feel good about giving advice about, do this or don't do that or anything like that, because I look back at some of this stuff back when I did some videos on various topics of stuff, various lessons I've learned stuff. I look back at that stuff. I'm like, that was not good advice. Maybe at that point in time, maybe it was okay. But looking back at it, I'm like, no, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I've gone back and deleted some stuff because it's not how I see things. So now it makes me more hesitant to put anything out there just because I know I'm going to look back and say, what was I thinking? So it's a weird place to be in, I gotta say.
Yeah, I feel the same way with all of that. Like, obviously, I don't have the degree of people asking me about gear or for advice or anything. But even when I get, like the other day, someone messaged me on Discord and he was looking for some advice when it comes to one of his photographs and how he had processed it in black and white. And obviously, I shoot a little bit of black and white, so
Just
I might, I might know a thing or two about it.
All the shades of gray.
Yeah, just 1 or 2 shades. Yeah,
50. Yeah,
exactly. But obviously I said my piece and gave the advice the best that I could. But even still, as I think about that and like the 2 previous portfolio reviews that I had done for people, I don't know. I just feel the entire time like I have no backing up of any of this knowledge. Like I'm just like you said, I'm fumbling my way through photography. Really, I'm fumbling my way through life.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Even like, and I feel that way, especially in my day job, in terms of I don't have any actual knowledge around psychology past a few classes that I've taken and whatever books I've read in my free time. And I don't have a degree in it, yet I'm attempting to help kids and parents, caregivers to work through their trauma and to better communicate. And I think this all just goes to say that like imposter syndrome, a lack of confidence, whatever you want to consider it exactly, is very pervasive, no matter how long you've been in the industry, regardless what industry that is. You're always going to feel like you are just figuring things out. I mean, I don't think it changes. Just like with age, like I still feel like some days I feel like I could be 15 again.
Yeah.
Like in terms of mental maturity, in terms of just whatever. And then I wake up the next day and I feel like I could be 50. Like this is not good. I do not like
that's
this.
probably after the gym days, right? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. After the gym days, after like a really rough family session that I had the night previous, like, I don't know. It's just, it's weird. And speaking specifically on gear and everything, I've continued to find myself in that trap of, as I think towards Japan and I debate what all to bring with me, I look at what some of these Japanese photographers are using and what gear they're using and everything. And I just get so in my head about it. But at the end of the day, and despite knowing that it doesn't matter, like it's more about the process, it's more about the enjoyment of the experience than it is about what gear you bring. But for some reason, it's very easy to get so wrapped up in, oh, what's XYZ photographer using for all of their work? It's just weird.
Maybe it's a matter of, that's something that we have control over. And, in terms of, there's not a lot of things we have control over in life, but something like if I have, whatever camera or whatever lens, you almost feel like you have a bit more control over the situation because you're more prepared for things or whatever. I don't know. I feel like so much of that stuff is just a matter of human nature, but it's a very weird matter. I mean, we're basically sheep. We're like monkey sheep. So I don't know. It's such a weird notion, but I guess it's just how we're programmed. But I guess the other way to look at it is just the people that are looking for whatever sort of suggestions or information and stuff, it's very helpful for them for that point in time. But just for me, at least, it's just looking back on things that I now realize were not great advice or whatever. I don't know. It's just a weird source of conflict. I don't know. But that's the long way of me saying this is why I don't do tips and tricks videos. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably for the best. There are far too many of them out there.
Yes. Yeah.
But speaking on gear for a minute here, I actually did recently pick up a new lens, and I shared this photo of it over on the Creative Banter Discord.
I saw that. It's a very fast lens for a large format lens.
Yes.
Insanely fast.
It is.
Like the sort of speed you basically never see on a large format lens, which I don't think people will, if a person's not familiar with the large format and they see this lens, they're like, what's the big deal? But yeah, it was an f2.8 lens, right?
Yeah, so I picked up the Schneider Xenitar 150 millimeter 2.8 lens, which is kind of a legendary lens, especially in the portrait world when it comes to large format. And like you were saying, 2.8 doesn't sound like all that wide or all that crazy until you take into consideration that on large format, it's equivalent to, I don't know, something insane like a 0.5 aperture or something.
And also the lenses, just for our sake of comparison, the lenses I routinely use are between f8.5 and f12.5.
Yeah.
So
The lens that I usually use is like f5.6,
yeah,
which is quite bright, and it's typically the widest aperture that you can get on most standard large format lenses. So this one's quite a bit of an oddball. It was created, I want to say, in the 50s, 30s to 50s, that range. So it's quite a bit of an old lens, but they used a lot in the military and for various governmental purposes because of the sharpness of the lens. So I picked that one up, and as some of the other comments that I got, I forget which server it was on Discord, whether it was LPW or ours, but I did not pay $15,000 for this lens. They are...
podcasting is not that lucrative.
Unfortunately not. I wish it was. Yeah, they're not worth that much, realistically. They're worth anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 in a really good condition for one of the newer, or one of the last models that they had made, which I think was in the 90s or early 2000s at the absolute latest. I paid a little over $1,000 for mine because I bought it in is condition with a broken shutter. So I have that being sent to a guy down in Lakeway, Texas. He's going to be doing the repair on the shutter for me.
Nice.
Just because the aperture control works fine, and you can open and close the shutter with that mechanism just fine.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't very easily switch between shutter speeds.
So it's kind of gunked up and
it's gunked up. And then, of course, you can't cock the shutter because of that difficulty. And it's an older Comper shutter, which is German made, one of the first shutters to be made, versus a newer, what most people who shoot with large format would know is Kopal shutter. So I'm looking forward to it.
What are your plans for any particular subjects or styles or anything you have in mind?
So I bought this one specifically because for two sort of reasons. One, it ties into what we were just talking about of gear advice and looking at what other gear people are using. It's the lens, I believe, I'm almost positive, that Brian Scoopmott uses for his portrait work. And if you're not familiar, definitely check out his work because it's just beautiful. And so but really I was looking for a portrait lens because of a project that I'll be working on after I get back from Japan, where I'm going to be section hiking along the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania.
Cool.
And the idea is to take portraits of various hikers and then pair it with intimate details along the trail. And I don't know exactly how this is going to formulate. I'm kind of leaving it up in the air past that. But yeah, I wanted a lens that would do a little bit better for portrait work than the 210 5.6 that I have. So,
well, that's cool. That's got to be a pretty big lens, right?
Yeah, it's about a pound, 2 pounds, something like that. Yeah, it's a hefty little lens.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly exciting. I have not added a new lens in, I think it had to have been 2017, 2018. I think somewhere in there was when I got the my most recent lens. I did swap out one lens for another one, just from the reason, I think I mentioned this in the past, that all of my lenses had a black dial on it for adjusting, I guess, the shutter speed and all that. One of them had a silver ring. I'm like, this cannot continue. So I sold that one and replaced it with the exact same lens, but with a black ring on it. And I gotta say, that was one of the best days of my life. Just, having all the lenses, everything matches, everything is clean. I'm like, this is so much better. So it was money well spent. But yeah, other than that, I think at a certain point, once you, especially for large format, since they don't make anything new anymore, once you get a set of lenses that works really well for you, I love the fact that you can just keep those for a very, very, very long time. And, in this case, this lens giving you something much different than you've had in the past, which is all part of the process of, figuring out what you need and all that. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
exciting. Yeah.
And the nice thing too is that it works. It's a millimeter equivalent, or not equivalent, but it's a 100 millimeter lens, which I haven't used previously. That's probably the standard lens
Yeah, it's a
on
very
4x5
normal lens. Yeah.
So that's going to be provide a little bit of change for me. And in the past, when I was working with large format, I was strictly carrying and didn't have any other lenses to bring with. But I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted adding another lens to the pile. I mean, I do have a 135 5.6 as well that was given to me, I think last year or so, but haven't really touched that much. So I don't know. It's just weird. I'll see how everything works out with this lens, see if I end up keeping it and go from there. But
cool.
Yeah.
So it is probably about time we do the artist of the week. So who do we have this week?
So this week we have Isaki Nagawa. He's a Japanese photographer. On Instagram, he is Nagoshi. It's Nagaoshi. And he runs in the same circle as Sho Hoshino and many of the other Japanese photographers photographing around the Tokyo and Nagano prefectures of Japan. And he just has, much like Sho, has some really beautiful work that just shows a totally different side of the world than what we are used to. He's come up in prevalence quite a bit recently, having been I think he won something for NLPA. Here he was a runner-up in 2022 for Trees, Forest, and Woodland.
He's got some beautiful work. Lots of tree photos. Great emphasis on light. Nothing that is like over the top. It's all it's understated in a very natural way. Where you look at basically any of these scenes, I'm like, this looks like I'm just looking at reality. It's not like it's, over the top sort of stuff, like can be the case sometimes. So it's really, really beautiful. Yeah. Lots of textures and shapes and just really fascinating work.
He has one photograph that I'm looking at now from November 20th, 2024. It's a seventh one down on the right-hand side, looking at his Instagram grid. He calls it Clinging to Life. And it's just this nice sort of dichotomy, this split between this rock wall and the forest on the side. And just that contrast of color, the contrast of texture, especially, is really quite pleasing. And then just to have that orange tree in the upper left quadrant contrasting against the orange of the rock in the lower left is really, really nicely done.
Yeah. And the one that was posted just before that, so down one row and then on the far left there, these trees with I'm just going to guess that they're Japanese maples because it's Japan and they look like maples, and I don't know. But these trees with these beautiful trunks where it looks like almost like two figures, and then the warm colored leaves against a cool background. He calls that one autumn's embrace. Just really, really absolutely beautiful. I love photos in that more subtle sort of light where there's so much more nuance to it. I mean, obviously, it's really nice if it's backlit too or stuff like that, but just there's so much nuance to be pulled from the very subdued and subtle light. And he works very, very well with that.
Yeah. And I mean, getting away from even nature work, if you look, he has it linked. He also does architecture photography, and he has it linked in his little bio, his page for it. Even his architecture photography, I'm fascinated with the individuals who are able to do this subject so cleanly and so well, and just really just a good eye for detail, for form, especially.
Yeah, and for a lot of the architectural stuff, which I'm looking at right now, I mean, you have these, beautiful structures, but then, set against, a very, large open sky. So it balances, the structure with the openness of the sky, which is quite nice, where it's not just like filled in the frame. And in his case, maybe it's like, leaving room for like a magazine headline or something like that. And then, a lot of the interior spaces are quite nice as well. So yeah, absolutely beautiful work.
Yeah, I'm looking at his architecture page on the one that he had posted on October 9th of 2024. It's the third one on the top of the grid on the right-hand side. That one just really fits well with what you were saying.
Yeah.
It's a really pleasing building itself that's photographed very nicely.
And what's interesting about that one too is you kind of look at the building that's next to it, and then also the building in the background. And then the foreground is kind of not really, the foreground itself isn't very flattering, but in a way that makes it grounds it in reality, where, you have this, this building that looks like these two very solid, and then you have this foreground where it looks like it's kind of like unfinished, but then you see it's in the context of the other stuff where maybe some photographers would try to eliminate all the other stuff and just do a beauty shot of the building. But this is more so a building in its actual surroundings. And you have, between the contrast between, this building and the surrounding buildings, it does build a little bit more of that sense of story. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.